Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the Showroom Logic webinar, Google AdWords Shakeup. Is this an opportunity, business as usual, or something else? This is our second webinar in the series, and my name is Teresa. I'm the VP of Sales here at Showroom Logic. And so first off, some quick housekeeping. You've all been muted, but we'd like to see your questions. So please do funnel them through the chat function of the webinar portal. We'll try to get to all of the questions at the end. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is a ton of content to cover today. So for any questions that we don't answer, we will follow up with you directly. So please do send them in. We've also incorporated questions from our first webinar in the series into today's presentation. So now I would like to introduce Jake Hoops. He is our VP of Product Development, and he'll be leading today's presentation. Jake lives in Utah, but he also lives at the intersection of technology and marketing. So this is what gives him some really good perspective on what works and what doesn't work when it comes to executing online strategies in your marketing and really making data-driven decisions, which is what this is all about. He's spoken at many search marketing events around the country and has a ton of good information to share with you today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Jake. And if you are speaking, we can't hear you just yet.
Yeah, sorry, Teresa. I was having a hard time finding the mute button while in the full screen presentation mode. So let me jump back to that real quick. Thank you for that for that introduction, Teresa. Excited to be here with you guys today. We do have an awful lot that we're going to cover. We're going to jam through it pretty quickly. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the slides are numbered. So if you do have questions, make a note of the number. We can always come back to it because we do want to have an extensive Q&A towards the end of our time here together. But with that, we're going to jump into it. So today, we're here to talk about this. At least this is what we thought we were dealing with a couple of months ago when Google made this announcement. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the end of February was an interesting time. For the first time in over a decade, Google announced a very significant change to the anatomy of the search engine results page. It had been pretty much the same format for over 10 years. And then without much advance notice and with very little additional information, they rolled out a very significant change, and it caught a lot of buzz in the industry, and there's a lot of speculation around it. And fueled by the lack of communication that was coming from Google about this change, there was a lot of concern that was circulating. And a lot of folks were thinking that this was a significant game changer for the industry. And today we have a little bit of a different perspective now because we do have a lot more data. It's been 7 weeks since that change has rolled out. And rather than looking at it through that perspective, we're thinking this is probably a better moniker for what it looks like for us today. Definitely significant, definitely something to pay attention to, but perhaps not as widespread of an issue as we initially thought. But today we're going to get into that data, and we're going to tell you why we're thinking what we're thinking and share with you exactly the stats that we've been watching over the past 7 weeks since this happened. So to set the stage for that, let's take a look at the traditional desktop search engine results page. This is what a results page looked like for over a decade prior to February. You had your traditional paid search ads forming an inverted L, where the ads showed across the very top of the main results window and then occupied an additional 7 slots down the right-hand side. That's sidebar is what we'll call that. Well, with the announcement and with the change, Google moved to a format that got rid of the sidebar ads and replaced all of the ads with mainline ad positions. And in addition to the removal of the 7 sidebar ads, they did make an addition of one more ad in the main window. So if you compare those two side by side, you'll see that historically there were 3 ads that showed before the organic results. Now for most queries, Google's now showing 4. And that's a pretty significant change, especially when you consider that 30% of the ad positions are now no longer showing. That's a significant reduction in the supply of impressions that can be shown. And as any student of economics can tell you, when supply changes and demand remains relatively fixed, there are some price implications with that. And so the smart dealer is asking, what does this mean for me? Because this does have potential to move the landscape in a significant way. So as we talk about these changes, we also do need to balance that with an understanding of what hasn't changed. This new format is a desktop search format change. That means that the mobile search results has not changed. And that's actually quite significant. This is a recent depiction coming from Google showing not only the rise in traffic and the rise in mobile traffic, but if you look at the very top, you can see that in Q4 of last year, mobile finally eclipsed and surpassed desktop in just sheer number of search queries being executed on Google. And this is aggregated across all industry types. This is a very wide swath of data. So we wanted to look at that a little more closely with just automotive. And so what we're looking at here actually is a similar data set over an 18-month period. So starting in October 2014 through last Saturday, middle of April 2016. And this data set is featuring a large group with whom we work. And the interesting thing to pay attention to here is those colored lines in the graph. Blue represents total number of sessions or visitors coming through. Orange is mobile, green is desktop, and purple is tablet. And there was an interesting thing that occurred on a very consistent basis starting last summer, about 9 months ago. You can see that the mobile traffic line surpassed and has consistently held a volume advantage over desktop. And that's not an insignificant change, because as we're talking about all of this data today, we're going to be looking at data specific to desktop traffic only. And there's some interesting implications to all of this, and we'll equip you with a few important takeaways here at the end of the call, because this is actually an important nuance that a lot of advertisers are going to fall into a trap with. So as we consider this, we can't help but ask, why the change? And Google, as I mentioned, has not been real forthright with their communication in this. They've referenced that part of the motivation for this is to provide a consistent user experience across devices. They also point to some long-running betas where they have seen better performance across the board. But I think we all really know what that means. At the end of the day, this has the potential to allow Google to better monetize their search product. And the data that we're going to be looking at definitely shows how that's happening. So the data set that we're going to look at, I want to talk about it for just a moment, just so we're all on the same page. So we're looking at a swath of about 15 weeks worth of data. Each one of these date ranges on the timeline represents the date of the first day in that week, but it's a full week's worth of data. So we're looking at data that from Monday, January 4th, through end of day on Sunday, April 17th, so just 3 days ago. But what's important is that when Google made this announcement, it wasn't a full immediate rollout. It was a graduated rollout. So that announcement was made through some media sites on the 18th of February, and during the week, beginning on February 22nd, was when the rollout occurred. And by the end of the week, it was deemed complete. But during that week, at any given point, you may have got the old search format and you may have got the new one. And so when we look at before and after comparisons, it's important to make sure that we're not looking at the actual transition week, because that data is murky, because there's no way to definitively say the data we're seeing from that week falls clearly into the old format or falls clearly into the new format. So when we look at the data comparing before and after periods, we're going to be omitting that transition week, just so we have a very clear and clean apples to apples comparison here. So when we try to measure the impact, we want to look closely at the metrics that are most impactable. From a search engine results page, a user is able to engage on really 3 levels. And those are measured in these following metrics. Impressions, obviously, how many eyeballs you're getting in front of. Clicks, and by extension, your click-through rate. Both of those are good measures of how people are engaging with the ads that they're seeing. And then cost, of course, is a good measure of the intersection of what those people are doing with where the market conditions and the auction conditions are. And ultimately, that's what is driving your cost and your ROI. And so these are 3 different but very important metrics to look at. And they all tie directly to the search results page. And so this is where we're going to focus today. And we'll start with impressions. Now, we called attention earlier to that transition time of the week of February 22nd. And it's really interesting to plot the impression data over time and look at the correlations of the data shifts as a function of that date. And without doubt, there's definitely some correlations here. And so the skeptic would say, oh, well, that's fine, the impressions have changed, but what else has changed? If you drop your budget in half, of course impressions are going to go down. But during that same time frame, actually, the budget fueling these impressions and these campaigns that we're looking at was increasing. And I have to point out something I glossed over, but the data size or the data sample that we're looking at here is a huge data set. We're looking at just over 65 million impressions in this 15-week period. So these are huge data sets spanning hundreds of clients and thousands of different campaign types. And they're all impressions that occurred on a search or on the search network on desktop devices. And when we're looking at data of that scale and magnitude, it's undeniable that there's some correlating trends that coincide very sharply with what we're seeing on the week of February 22nd. So what does that look like? Here's the same data plotted a little bit differently just to help us get our minds around it. Impressions definitely dropped. They were down 14.8%. And spend was actually up. And so just like an economist will adjust numbers for inflation so they can accurately compare 2015 GDP to 1915 GDP, we also want to adjust our metrics for the fluctuating spend so that we truly have an apples-to-apples comparison. And dollar for dollar, what we're seeing is that the impressions that we're able to reach have dropped, and they've dropped by a fairly significant margin, 22.7% in our data set. Now, is that alarming? We'll see. Is it unexpected? Absolutely not. We saw that coming. This was one of the things that was definitely easier to predict because of simple supply and demand economic principles at play here. But this is where it starts to get interesting, because even though the impressions did drop, ultimately what we care about is not really impressions, especially for search, right? Impressions they have their place, especially with display campaigns, but really what we're after is metrics that are further down the funnel, and clicks and leads and visits and auto sales. With each one of those steps further down the funnel, the metric gets more meaningful and more impactful. And what we're seeing in clicks is actually a slightly different story. Of course, we have a little bit of an interesting anomaly here on the week of the 22nd, but after that transition week, what we see from a click perspective is relatively stable. In fact, there's some moderate growth in play. And so what we can infer from that, of course, is if our impressions are declining, but our clicks are holding relatively stable, then we know that there's some performance delta in our click-through rate that's helping us make up that difference. And when we plot the click-through rate, that's exactly what we're seeing. The before period relative to the after period, we're seeing changes of like 0.4% on average to the click-through rates. And for that metric, that's actually very, very healthy, very significant improvement. And so there's definitely some deep market moving trends in play here, because impressions are on the declines, but clicks are actually up modestly. They're up 4.6%. And of course, we do need to normalize that for spend. And when we adjust it, we do see that dollar for dollar clicks are down, but they're not down nearly as much as impressions were. So there's some interesting metrics that are in play here. And so we want to understand them better, and we want to try to subdivide our data and just dig a little bit deeper. And ultimately, this particular change to the results page is primarily a change that manipulates the relative position of different advertisers' ads. Positions 7, 8, 9, and 10 are either completely annihilated or relocated to a very different part of the search engine results page. And so understanding what's happening as a function of the ad's position is a really important piece to the data puzzle. And this is where I think it starts to really become an interesting story. And this is where it starts to deviate from a lot of the stories that have been told by other agencies or other platforms that are not specifically automotive. Because what we are seeing in our data, which again, these are large data sets. We're looking at 65 million impressions, 500,000 clicks. I mean, these are sizable data sets that we're looking at. And we are actually seeing some really positive things occurring in positions 1 and 2. And from there, we're seeing some surprising things occurring in positions 3 and 4. Outside of automotive, these slots, these ad positions, have seen some nice gains, but for whatever reason within the automotive ecosystem, they're not experiencing the same benefits. And that's really important for you as an advertiser to understand, because at the end of the day, what is it that you're after? You're after results. You're after driving an impact for your business. And so being able to subslice your own data and look at it not only in the context of how you're doing, but how the market's doing, that can create some opportunities to identify some actionable next steps. And we're going to talk about some of those here in just a minute. But before we do, I want to touch on the last metric that we're able to easily measure from a results page, and that's cost. And specifically cost per click, or CPC. Now what we're seeing here is, again, interesting, but not entirely surprising. When we look at kind of the rolling average and we compare these two peaks, or excuse me, these two points on the graph, what we're seeing is what I would consider a pretty significant change in cost. A lot of the early data out of other agencies or providers that span multiple verticals, again, people that are not just automotive, are not seeing quite this same shift. Now, is this a cataclysmic tectonic shift? Is this a nuclear bomb that's been dropped on us? Probably not, but it is significant. I mean, a 55-cent increase in your per click cost is not something that should go unnoticed. And it's really interesting to see how these changes correspond so nicely with the timeline of when the SERP results changes were being manipulated. And correlation does not always mean causation. Butterfly flaps its wings in Mexico. That doesn't mean that there's a hurricane in New England. However, it is undeniable that these two data points coincide with each other. And that's really interesting, because what it tells us is that we need to be vigilant, and we need to put in place some detection systems. We need to be aware of what's happening. And the data points that we really need to be watching are actually not new. These are things that you should be watching anyway, just as a best practice. We need to understand what your average position is looking like. Is that changing over time? If it's changing, is it because there's new competitors? Is it because existing competitors have shifted strategy? I mean, there's a million and one reasons why these things could change, but in the final analysis, we need to be aware of these prior to being able to take action on these. Other metrics we need to watch closely is our click-through rates. And of course, we saw that cost per clicks are beginning to move a little bit, and we need to be aware of that. So all these things are easily identifiable if you're watching your data with any amount of vigilance, which you should be doing. So the interesting thing here is that as markets shift, it creates gaps, and gaps create opportunities. So what is detrimental to one species could be very beneficial to another, right? The meteor that ended dinosaurs also created the opportunity for mammals. And so the question is not, is this happening, but what can I do in relation to the changes that are happening? How can I stay ahead? How can I make sure that I remain relevant and don't get relegated off to the island of misfit toys? And there's really 4 opportunities that we see that have been created by this. And they're not necessarily new. In fact, some of them, again, are best practices that we should be well acquainted with and should be part of our normal operations. But they're worth mentioning here. The first is the role of ad rank. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this because this is a deep topic, but ad rank is essentially a measure by which Google will determine if you show and where you show on their search results page. And there's a few things that go into that. Your bid is one of them, but it's definitely not the only one. In fact, your bid, a lot of people will I've even seen clients be frustrated because they have a relatively high bid, but their average CPC, what they're paying, is significantly less than that. They're like, well, why can't I spend more? I want to spend more. I want to buy my way into the position that I'm after. And you can't. The short answer is that you can't. You can't buy it. You have to earn it, because your bid is really only one factor that goes into your ad rank. And you will only pay just enough to beat your next worst competitor. So even if I'm willing to pay a sizable amount, if that's not necessary, then Google's not going to charge me for that. So this graph here is actually a really nice representation of how that works out. So it's very possible for an advertiser with a significantly more conservative bid to earn, through quality score, through good click-through rates and relevance, to earn a higher position than someone who's willing to pay significantly more than they are. In this particular example, an advertiser willing to spend $2 per click is able to significantly out-hit an advertiser that's willing to spend 4 times that. And this happens every day, and especially with what we're seeing now with the market moving towards a slightly more aggressive bidding environment, your ad rank becomes even more of an important thing to watch, because in many cases, your ROI might not support simply throwing more money at it. So you have to get creative. You have to go into the hard work of improving rank. And that's not new, but it's definitely more relevant because of these changes. Another interesting opportunity that has been created by these changes is the ad format and how these ad formats are using extensions. So to understand extensions, I do want to touch just really quickly on what we consider the base ad format. The traditional format of an ad, and these were the ads that showed on the sidebar on the right-hand side, and those are gone away now. But traditionally, the way those ads were written were through 4 parts, and you as an advertiser had four tools that you could use. You had your headline, which was 25 characters, that shows here in blue. You had your display URL, shown here in green, and then you had 2 headlines, 2 descriptions, each of which could be 35 characters. And when properly written, your ad would look something like this, where you had headline, URL, description. However, if your ad was in the top 3 historically, even though the ad was written exactly the same, this is what it would look like. Notice it's the exact same content, but the format is different. They've taken description 1 and they've bumped it up into the into the headline. And even though it's exactly the same, it actually reads very differently because your headline now has the opportunity to be more of a sentence than a headline. You have more available characters because you can use that full 25 plus the additional 35 characters to create a different fill to your ad. And historically, you had to be very aware of your position because if your ad was on the sidebar, positions 4 through 10, your format would look a little bit differently than if you had a higher average position. And it was challenging because you had to write an ad that worked well in both environments. Well, because of the new change and the consolidation and the removal of the sidebar ads, 100% of your paid search ads are now going to show in this newer format. So it's an opportunity to refresh maybe your messaging and your strategy and your approach. But even more importantly is it's also an opportunity to take better advantage of extensions. And this is the fun part. So an extension is a piece of copy that augments or shows in addition to your base ad. Now in this screenshot, we have 3 great examples of different ads that are using different amounts of extensions. Let's start with the red one on the bottom. This is just your vanilla base ad. They're not using an extension. It looks exactly like the format of the sample ad we looked at before. They have a headline, description 1, description 2, and the display URL. Nothing else. The ad in yellow right above it, you can see it takes up a little bit more inventory, and if you're paying close attention, you can see that it looks like there's an additional line of text. That's because they're leveraging an extension, and that extension takes up more real estate, and the data is unequivocally clear that better use of extensions will produce a better click-through rate. Now let's take a look at this top ad, this one in the green box, and we're actually going to do a slightly deeper dive into this because they're going crazy with extensions. They're using call extensions, they're using callouts, they're using site links, they're also using location extensions. Not only are they using location extensions, but it looks like they've got that plugged into their Google My Business account, which is where they're getting real-time hour of operation data. The amount of real estate that this ad takes up is nearly twice as much as its competitor down below, even though it's still subject to the same requirements, the same base guidelines for the ad requirements. And all this is done through leveraging better use of the extensions that Google and AdWords makes available. There's actually a number of extensions that can be used. Some we found are definitely more effective than others. Some are arguably a lot more difficult to produce because there's third-party validation requirements. But at any point in time, your ad, because of the new format and because all ads are now swept into that main search results window, all ads qualify and are eligible to show extensions based on Google's discretion. Now, the extensions can't be hardwired. You can't say specifically that I want to show these 2 extensions every time. Google makes those decisions dynamically, and there's a lot of control that Google takes that the advertisers don't get. But across the board, putting your best foot forward is a significant opportunity now because historically, extensions were reserved just for the top 3 ads. And now all 7 paid search ads on the results are able to show them. And that's a big change, definitely something to be aware of. Now, this is where the ninja stealth mode kicks in because there are a couple of opportunities that are not as easily identifiable. And I'm going to call these unintended because these are things that, if neglected, will actually probably hurt you. The interprets bids based off of devices. So if I'm an advertiser and I want to spend $1 per click for a desktop visitor, and I want to say spend 50 cents for a mobile visitor, as an advertiser, I don't have the ability to tell Google I want to spend $1 for desktop and 50 cents for mobile. What I can do is say, I will spend $1 for desktop, and then I modify my desktop bid for mobile. So if I want 50 cents, I have to put a negative 50% bid adjustment on my mobile devices. Why does that matter? It's a little bit nuanced, but this is actually really interesting, because if you find yourself in an environment where you have your mobile devices performing well, and let's talk a little bit about performance. It's really easy to get your device performance metrics. Any report inside of AdWords can be segmented. There's a big button at the top that shows your segments. One of those segments is device. When you select your device segments, it'll spit out your data by that segment, in this case, by devices. And so it's really easy to get at that data. So here's a really good example, and this is live data. This is a dealer that is a client of ours, and they're seeing great performance out of their mobile device segment. Their cost per clicks are much lower. Their conversions are, they're crushing it. They're getting a lot of leads out of it. And those leads are a lot cheaper on mobile than they are on desktop. So what happens here? We established earlier that mobile is on the rise and mobile's doing great. But we also know that mobile bids are modified as an extension of your desktop bid. So what happens if you're going through your data and you see that your desktop performance is slacking a little bit? And maybe there's wiggle room, you have the budget, you want to get a little bit more aggressive with your bid, and rather than say bidding, maybe 60 cents in this case, maybe you decide to go double down and bid $1, bid $1.50. You're going crazy, you're getting aggressive. Well, because your mobile bid exists as a modifier on that change that you just made, if you don't come back in and recalibrate your mobile bid adjustment, what have you just done? You've also significantly increased your bid on mobile, which in this case doesn't need it. It's already doing well. So because of the way that those are tied, the unintentional outcome of making a strategic change that you thought was desktop only can very quickly be undone. And so that's really an important thing to be on the lookout for, because that can be introduced without even knowing it. Very easy to overlook that. So pay attention to your mobile device bid modifiers. Now let's talk about the fourth opportunity that's been created here. And this maybe isn't so much an opportunity as it is a liability, because again, this is one of those unintended things that can be swept in if you're not paying close attention. Now this graph that we're looking at is that same dealer group that I referenced earlier when we were looking at the mobile traffic trends over time. But this is a graph of the different device types and the screen resolutions that are used. The items that are checked, these are all the desktop resolutions. The unchecked ones, though, those are mobile devices, and because this is a desktop search engine results change, the mobile experience is not going to be impacted. But I wanted to show you what is happening to the majority of your users that are looking at your site through these different resolutions. Or excuse me, not your site, but they're looking at Google, that are coming to your site through Google. So let's jump to the first one. The most popular desktop screen resolution in that data set, which was nearly 12 million impressions, or excuse me, sessions, 12 million visitors, so it's a lot of data. The most popular one was a resolution of 768 by 1024. Under the new format, with the paid search ads now occupying the top 4 positions, what does that do to your organic presence? The only organic listing at that resolution that is going to show above the fold, meaning they don't have to scroll down to see it, is 1. And so if you have historically had a lot of success with organic, and you draw a lot of traffic from organic, you might want to take another quick look at your organic metrics and see if they're continuing to contribute. Because as the paid search ads have moved from the sidebar into the main bar, and they've added that fourth ad, it pushes the entire result set down. And this is happening not just on this resolution. This is the second most popular resolution size. Same thing. There's only one organic ad, or not ad, listing, one organic listing that's visible above the fold. Now I can scroll down, and people do. I mean, just because it's not above the fold doesn't mean it's never going to get clicked. But there is a propensity for people not to scroll or to click first on the things that are most easily accessible. And if we look at the third most popular resolution size, 1024 by 768, again, we see the same thing. So why does this matter? Because at the end of the day, this is not a paid search problem. This is an organic search problem. So why do we even mention it here? We mention it because from a strategic perspective, if that has been part of your mix before, you might want to make sure that you're not missing out on opportunities there. And if you are, then that might be a great opportunity to rethink your paid search strategy for those keywords. I know a lot of dealers that have certain sensitivities around bidding on their own brand names. Well, what happens if you don't bid on your brand name now? Well, chances are you have less opportunity to get in front of somebody above the fold. And so this definitely can inform your overall strategy in a really fundamental way. So even though it's not directly related to paid search, it's definitely an unintended consequence of this migration of ads from the sidebar into the main search window. So as we look at these recommendations and the things that we need to be aware of, and some of the opportunities that it can create, that we want to sum it up with three real important, tangible takeaways, or the three T's of your digital marketing strategy. First one is your technology. Now, most of the people on this call are probably clients of Showroom Logic, but even if you're not a client, even if you're using AdWords as your platform, if you're not using a technology solution outside of AdWords, AdWords is a technology, it is a platform, and there are things that can be done to optimize that technology. Things that can be done to make sure that you're consistently and methodically testing for position and for click-through rate and being aware of and responding to these trends. The technology is a very big piece of the tool set. And just because you're using a certain provider or you have it in-house doesn't absolve you from the responsibility of understanding what your technology is capable of doing and leveraging it. And that leads into the second T, which is transparency, because especially if a third party is involved, whether it's Showroom Logic or another provider, transparency into the data is absolutely crucial, more so now than ever, because if these trends are shifting and you're unaware of it, man, the train will pull out of the station in the middle of the night and you might never know. And so it's more crucial now than ever to ensure that you're both have access to and are regularly consuming the data that's available. You know, if you don't have access to your AdWords account, if you don't have access to your analytics accounts, get it, because the data's there. You just need to get access to it. The last big takeaway that we want to focus on, of course, is team. Now, a lot of the people on this call are folks that are not necessarily in the trenches of the day-to-day management of the campaigns. You might have a team that reports to you. You might be using an outside third-party partner to augment your own resources. And that becomes really important because the coordination between you and your team and the transparency and understanding what they're doing and the results that they're driving is crucial for you in order to make those decisions. And it's, especially if it's an outsourced team, they're going to be the ones that are responsible for implementing a lot of the strategy direction that you're providing them. And so having a team that is reliable and that you can trust and that is good at what they do is becoming more important now than ever. And those go without saying, right? I mean, these are things that should be a no-brainer, but they're definitely things that you need to be aware of and that need to stay on top of for you to be able to manage the results that you're responsible for. So in summary, guys, you know, there was a lot of concern when Google made this announcement, and it was compounded significantly by the lack of communication that they provided around it. In the end, in the short term, you know, is it a game-changing tectonic shift in our ecosystem? You know, probably not. We're definitely seeing some changes as a result of it, but I don't think it changes the day-to-day. You need to make sure you're keeping an eye on your metrics. Look at your data. Just look at your data. If there's one takeaway from this, it's to watch your own data and watch it closely. And we talked today about what metrics you should be looking at and some of the opportunities that have been created by this shuffle. And then, you know, of course, we're talking about the 3 T's and the things you need to do to stay on top of things. Now, guys, we want to turn it over now to a Q&A session. I know that there's probably a lot of questions, and so we want to make sure that we have time to get to those. With that, I think I'll pass the meeting back to Teresa to help moderate that portion, and look forward to having a good discussion here with the time that's left for us. If you do have questions that come up afterwards, this is my email address. Reach out to me. Let me know. Would love to have a discussion with what you guys are seeing specifically in your markets. And so with that, I'll pass it back to you, Teresa.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was really, really informative. And I think because we had so many questions in the first series that we've answered in this webinar today, there aren't many questions coming through the Q&A portal. One was about featured snippets. I don't know if you want to touch on that. Another question was just about getting a recording of this webinar, and so I'll make sure to make the recording available to anyone that wants to share with other stakeholders in your organization. And to Jake's point, I would just reiterate, make sure that you've got access to your data, and our client success managers leverage Google Analytics and AdWords, and we have our own heat maps reporting and a lot of different tools that'll help you kind of understand what's going on, but they're always happy to jump in the weeds with you and really dig into this information.
Yeah, so let's talk very quickly about structured snippets. It's a relatively new feature that Google has made available. Think of them the same way that you think of an extension. They're essentially a type of extension. In fact, if you bear with me, let's find that screenshot of the extension manager. Here we go. So right here, this is how they're accessed. They behave just like an extension would. So they're set up and they're defined, and then at Google's discretion, they're added to an ad. So they'll augment the ad copy, and they'll show sometimes in conjunction with other extensions. Sometimes they may show in isolation, but they're managed and created in the same fashion as your traditional extensions would be.
Okay, great, thank you. And we will make a copy of the webinar available to those that have asked for it. So thank you, everybody. If there are any more questions, now is the time. Otherwise, as Jake mentioned, please reach out to him. You can also reach out to your existing client success manager here at Showroom Logic, or give us a call on the sales side and we can help you out there as well. So thanks everybody again for your time this morning or this afternoon. And with that, I will let you all go. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.